So you want to create a blog with Next.js 13, Sanity as an headless CMS, and Tailwind.css for styling? Well, you have come to the right video, since in today's video we'll create this. Now the interesting thing is we'll do it in just 1 hour, and I will fix live deployment errors with you. You will learn a lot, so I think let's check out the demo behind me, and now let's go. So on my screen right now you see what we will build today. So right here we have our blog page with all of our posts. Right here on top we have our dark mode theme switcher, and if I click on it we will get white mode, and if I reload the page right now you see we don't get any flash and the white mode is being persisted. Now if I click on a blog article, so let me click on the first one, it's pretty much instant, and if I scroll down we have an image and a text right here. I can click back on my logo, we get redirected to the blog page, and let me click on the second blog and that's also almost instant, and we have an image right here. So that's what we'll build today, so now let's go. So to get started I will cd into my desktop directory and cd into my YouTube directory, and I will run npx create -next-app at latest. Then I will click enter. Next.js will now ask me, or the CLI actually will now ask me for the project name, and let's just name it blog next 13, something like that. Then we of course will use TypeScript, we will use ESLint, we will use Tailwind.css, we won't use the source directory, we will use the app router, and we won't customize the import alias. Now I will click enter and this will install for a bit. So Next.js is now finished installing, and if I now open my Visual Studio Code, you'll see I already opened the project, but if you want to open the project as well, click on here on top on File and click on Open Folder. But the first thing you see right here right now is just an empty project with nothing configured. And I think the first thing I will do is actually install a development dependency for Tailwind. So I will open the terminal and just paste it right here. That's a development dependency by Tailwind.css. That's the typography plugin, and we will use it to style our rich editor text. And if you don't want to write out the command yourself, just go to my GitHub README and copy it from there. But now let me click enter, and now you see it has already installed, and what I will now have to do is actually go to the tailwind.config.js, and then inside of the plugins field right here, or in the array of plugins, let me paste the require Tailwind CSS typography plugin. So all it tells Tailwind right here is pretty much to use this typography plugin and to bundle it and to give me the class names for that. And that's all it does. And now the next thing I will want to do is actually clean up a little bit. I don't need this background image that Next.js ships with, so let me just delete this whole extend field and let me save that. So that looks good. And then I want to do a bit more of cleanup, since if I go to the page route right here, or to our index page in that sense, we have a pretty big template right here that Next.js ships with, and I don't need that. So what I will do is actually just delete everything so we can start out fresh. What I will do now is just do an export default function index page, and let me just open that function. Let's just return an h1 with hello from the index page. What I want to do now is actually open the terminal, and let's run npm run dev, which will start the dev server. This will open on localhost 3000, so let me open that. So I'm now on localhost 3000, and as you can see the page works, so everything is configured correctly, and I think we can now continue with actually creating the nav bar. And to do that, let me open the Explorer right here, and inside of the app folder, let's create a new folder called components. And inside of here, I will create a new file called navbar.tsx. Now this component will be a server component, so I won't need to use this use client directive, so we can continue as it is right now. So the first thing I will do right here is an export default function called navbar. Now let me open that function and let's return something. Let's start off with a div. Let me style that div. So I will give it a class name of max width 3xl, mx will be auto, px will be 4, sm will be px of 6, not 5 but 6, and we'll have an LG of px of 8. Now inside of this div, we'll have another div. So let me style that. We'll have an flex, we'll have an justify, which will be between, and an age of 16. And then inside of this div, I will create another div, and let me style that. So let's give it a class name of flex. Justify will be again between. We'll have items, which will be center, and width, which will be full. Now inside of this div, I will use the link component from Next, which I import also from Next. And that's pretty much an A tag, but you could say it's on steroids because it pretty much uses client-side routing. And now you will see that the link component right here hasn't imported for me. So let me do it again right here. And now TypeScript complains a bit. It tells me that href is missing. So right now I don't tell where the link should go. So let me do that. And the href will just be the index page. So I will just use an empty slash. And inside of this link, let me create an h1 tag. And let me style that. So I will give it a class name of text, which will be 2XL. We will have a font, which will be medium. And that looks good. Now inside of this h1, let me write Jan, then let me create a new span, and let's write just block. Now let me also style it. So I will give it a class name of text, which will be teal 500, and I think that's all actually. Now that looks good, but if I would now save that and go back, you will see nothing right now. And that's because I have to pretty much also render it inside of our layout. So let me go to the layout.tsx and let me continue inside of here. So let me first of all make a little bit of space right here so I can also see something. So that looks good. And then maybe let's first of all start with styling our body, since I want to use a different background color and we will use a dark theme switcher. So let's configure that right here. So right here, let me first of all use inside of here upticks, so I can add a few other class names. And then let me just wrap this in this $ brackets. And then we can continue with the class names. So we'll have an BG, which will be white, text, which will be black. Then we will have a dark, which will be BG gray of 900. Then we will also have a dark selection, which will be BG gray 900. Then we'll have a dark, which will be text white, age will be full, and we'll have a selection, which will be BG gray 50, just like that. Now the body is styled and we can now continue. So what I will do right now is right here just use my navbar component. Let me import that, and that will be in self-closing tag. So let's do that. Now if I save that and if I now go back, you will still see a bit of weird styling. And that's because the globals.css right now has some styles created from the Next.js template. And I don't need them, so let me just delete that right here. And if I now save that and go back, you will now see that that looks way better, and now it pretty much works perfectly. Now the first thing that I see right here, let me first of all zoom in that you see something, that the margin is right here way bigger than here. So we have some margin right here, but this text or this h1 tag in that sense goes right to the screen, and I don't want that. So let me change that. Let me go back to the layout.tsx and let me wrap this children inside of a main element. Now let me paste back the children and let's style that main. So let's give it a class name of max width 3XL, mx will be auto, px will be 4, sm will be px of 6, and lg will be px of 8. If I now go back, you will see that the margin is now pretty much the same on the navbar and on the index page, or on this h1 tag in that sense. So that looks good. Now one thing I already see is that if I pretty much select this text, that the background is white. But this should not happen, since actually I've styled that. And that's because I have misspelled right here. I gave it pretty much 2 colons and it should only have 1. So if I save it now and go back and select that, you will see we don't have this ugly white background now. And now I think the first thing we will actually do is pretty much create our dark theme switcher. I think we should pretty much make this logic work at first, and then we can continue with our sanity schema and everything like that. So let's go back to our code. And now inside of here, let's again open the Explorer. Let's go into the components folder and let's create a new file called providers.tsx. Now the first thing I will have to do right here is use the use client directive, since this will be pretty much a client component which will have state. And now inside of here, let's again do an export function. So let me do that. We will just name it providers. Inside of here, we'll destructure the children. And the first thing you will see is that TypeScript complains since it does not know what type children are. So let me just give it a type. So children will be of type React Node. And React Node is imported from React. And now I can open this function. And now inside of here, I will have to pretty much return a theme provider. And for that, we have a package called Next Themes. So let me open the terminal. Let me stop our dev server. And inside of here, I will run npm I, and I stands for install, next-themes. Now let's click install and let's wait for a second. So it has now done installing. So we can now go back. And Next Themes is just there to handle pretty much this whole theme switcher, so that the preference of the user gets stored and we don't get any flash on reload or anything like that. So that's a pretty handy package, so we don't have to do all the hard work by ourselves. And inside of here, I will just have to return our theme provider. So I will do a return theme provider. And theme provider is pretty much supplied by Next Themes, so the package that we have just installed. So let me click import and let's close that for now. Inside of here, I will now have to pass our children, and I also have to give it an attribute right here. So let's do that. And this will just be class. Now let me save that. And what we have to do now is go back to our layout.tsx right here. And now we'll have to wrap our navbar and our main element inside of this providers. So let me copy that right here and let's import our providers from our components and let me paste back what I've just copied. Now one more thing that the Next Theme package recommends to us is to pretty much suppress hydration warnings. And to do that, you will have to go right here into the HTML element and just write suppress hydration warning. Just like that, and that looks good. If I now go back, you will see still everything works, so that's good. And what I want to do now is right here on the right side, pretty much create a button to switch the theme. So let's do that right now. So to do that, let me again open the Explorer, and now inside of the components, I will create a new route, or a new file actually, called theme-button.tsx. And now the first thing I will have to do right here is again use the use client directive. So let's do that. And now we can start with this theme button. So let's again start with an export default function and let's name it theme button. And let me just open this function right here. And now inside of here, let me create a return statement and let's start off with a button. And now inside of this button, I want to pretty much check what theme we have right now. So Next Themes has a pretty handy package which we can use. So this will just be const and let's do an use theme which we import from Next Themes. And if I now go right here and click Control Spacebar, you will see we get a few pretty much options. And what I want to get is first of all this set theme. So right here, and I want to get a result theme. So that looks good. And now inside of the button, I want to pretty much check if our result theme is the dark theme. Then I want to show pretty much a light bulb. And if it's the light theme, I just want to use pretty much a moon icon. So let's do that. So this will be pretty much an if statement. So if result theme is equal to dark, let's use a ternary. I want to return something. And if this is false, I want to return also something. And now if it's dark, as I said, I want to pretty much show a sun or a light bulb or something like that. So let's go to hero icons. So I'm now on hero icons, and hero icons is a very cool free project which you can use to pretty much get icons. And right here, let me just search for sun and let me copy this first icon and I will copy the JSX. Let me go back and let me paste it right here. And then for the pretty much light mode, let me search for a moon. So let me go right here, Let's search for moon, and let me just copy the first JSX right here, or the first icon in that sense. And let me paste it right here inside of this return statement. So that looks good. And now let me also pretty much paste it, or not paste it, but also show it in the navbar. So let me go back to the navbar file, and now under this link, let me just use the theme button, and I have to import that from our components again. So now if I go back to our local host, you will still see nothing. Let me maybe reload that. Yeah, that's because our dev server is right now not open. So let me open my local host and let's do an npm run dev. Now I should go back, and this will take some time, so I will come back in a second. And now our dev server is restarted, and as we see the icon right here. But before we can actually continue any further, we will again have to go to our tailwind.config.js, since we pretty much have to tell Tailwind that we want to use not the system dark mode, but I want to use the dark mode based on a class attribute. So right here, what you will have to do is in dark mode, and this will just be equal to class. Now let me give it a comma, let's save that. Let me restart my dev server, so I will do an npm run dev. And now let's go back. So in theory, now everything should work. So let's now pretty much create the button, or the logic inside of the button. So let's go back, and now inside of this button, we have to use the set theme state right here, or pretty much to set our state. So what I will do is an on click. And now inside of here, let's do a set theme. And now inside of the set theme, I want to again just pretty much check if our result theme is again dark. I want to pretty much set the theme to light mode. And if our result theme is light, I want to set it to dark mode. So for that, I will again use an ternary. So let's do an if result theme is equal to dark. I want to show the light mode. So let's do light. And let me spell that correctly. And if this is false, I want to set it to dark. Now, if I save that and go back, it should actually now work. So let me click on that button, and yes, that works. Now, one thing I already see is if I reload that page right here, that actually all looks good, but you will see that right here, the icon is not the correct one. And that's pretty much an hydration thing. And that's why Next Themes actually recommends us to render this whole button client side. So what I will do is go back right here, and we'll have to create a use effect. So let's do that. So use effect, we have to import that from React, and let's just open that, and let's give it an empty dependency. Now I will also have to create a state. So let's do a const mounted and set mounted. And this will be equal to use state, and this will be false at the initial state. And now inside of this use effect, I will do a set mounted to true. And what I will also have to do is pretty much check if mounted is not true, then I will return null. So let me just do an if mounted is not true. Let me just open that, and let's return null. Now let me save that, and now let's go back. And if I pretty much reload our page, we now see that we get the right icon. So if we have dark theme, we get the sun. And if we pretty much go to white mode, and if I reload the page again, we get the moon. So that looks good, and that's what I wanted to see. So that works. Even though I don't really like this approach, since we again use pretty much client, or not client, but CSR, so client rendering. I don't really like this approach, since for example in Remix you don't have to do it, but I guess that's what you have to do, so bear that in mind, I guess. So we can now pretty much now create our index page, or our blog page in that sense. So what I think I will do at first is actually now create our sanity. So I'm now on the sanity.io homepage, and sanity is just pretty much an headless CMS, and inside of here we will pretty much create and store our blog posts, so our content in that sense. And I really like sanity since I think it's very flexible, very easy to use, and I also think they're pretty much the best in the business, at least currently. So to start off, I will right here click on developers, documentation, and right here, let's click on getting started. If we now click on create a project and scroll down a bit, you'll right here see we have a command to create a new sanity project. So let me just copy that and let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. Now let me open the terminal, let me stop the dev server and let me clear everything. And now inside of our terminal, let me just pretty much paste that command. And all this command does is pretty much create a new Sanity application at latest. We use a clean template, so no predefined schemas or anything. We pretty much get empty schemas. We then create a project, we give it the name of Sanity project, which I will change in a minute, and we pretty much use the dataset, which will be production. And now let's change the name. So I don't want the name to be Sanity project, but let it maybe be blog with Next.js. And now let me click enter and this will take a few seconds. And now the first thing you will see is that Sanity tells me that I already have an account, and that's correct. If you don't have an account or if you get any error, that's probably because you don't have linked your account or you haven't created one. So definitely do that and then come back to this tutorial. And now you already see Sanity will ask me a few questions, and the first one is if I would like to add configuration files for a Sanity project in this Next.js folder, and I don't want to do that, so I will click no, so an N pretty much. Then for the project output path, let me just use Sanity. So inside of our Explorer or project structure, it will pretty much create a new folder called Sanity. Now I will also want to use pretty much TypeScript. So let's click yes. And now this pretty much will install everything, or actually it won't, because I will have to use the package manager and I will use npm, but you can use also yarn if you want to do that. So let me click enter and now let's wait for a bit. So Sanity is now finished installing. So let me close the terminal and now let's go back to the website. If I now click on create schema, it will pretty much tell us how to create a schema. And as you see, that's the project structure. And if I go back and let me click on this newly created Sanity folder, you will see that's pretty much the same. The only difference is that we use .ts, and that's because we use TypeScript. And if I now go a bit further down, you will see how we pretty much create a new schema. And pretty much the basic overview is that we have to export default something. We have to give it a name, a type, a title, and pretty much the fields. And that's pretty much all you have to do. So let's start with that. So what I will do is again go into the Sanity folder inside of the schemas folder, and then I will create a new file called post.ts. Now, as you already have seen, all you have to do right now is do an export default, and let's open that. Now we'll have to give it a name, and the name will just be post lowercase. Then we'll have to give it a type, which will just be document, and we'll have to give it a title, where I will just uppercase the P of post. So that looks good, and now I have to give it a few fields. So the fields is an array with objects or fields in that sense. So the first field will just be the title of the post. So let's give it a name, and the name will just be title. Let's give it a type, and the type will just be string. And let's give it also a title, and the title will just be an uppercase title. So that looks good. And now let's create the next field, and the next field will be just a small overview. So let's give it a name, and the name will be overview. Let's give it a type, and the type will be string. And then let's also create a little title, and the title will just be overview uppercased. So that looks good. Now the next field I want to create is a slug. So let's do a name, which will be slug. We will create a type, which will be also of type slug. And we will create a title, which will be uppercased slug. Now that looks good. And the next field I want to create is pretty much the content, so the rich text editor. So let's do that. So let me again create a new field right here, and let's give it a name, which will just be content lowercase. Let's give it a type, which will be array, and let's give it a title, which will be uppercased content. So that looks good. And now, as you already see, we have given it a type which is array. But now we also have to pretty much tell Sanity what type of array it will be. And the type we want to create will be the block type. So now under the title, we'll have to do an of. This will be an array with an object which will have the type, and the type will just be block. Now also I have an error right here, and that's because I forgot to add a comma. And now in theory everything should work. And now another thing I also want to do is pretty much allow myself, or pretty much the creator of the blog post, to add images inside of the rich text. So I will have to give it a pretty much another field. So let's do that, and this will be of type image. And then I will also have to give it fields, and this will be again an array with an object. And here we'll have a type, which will be text. Then we'll have a name, which will be alt. And we'll have a title, which will be alternative text. Now this type of alt is actually not required. You don't have to give it. Just this type image would already pretty much be enough. But I use this alt for two reasons. Firstly, for SEO purposes, but also for people with disabilities. So that looks good. So I can now save that actually. So what I want to do now is actually start the dev server, since I want to see if everything works. So what I will do is actually open the terminal, and let's cd into our sanity folder, and let's run npm run dev. This will now start our dev server for sanity at localhost 3333. So let me open that. And I have now opened it actually, and I already see an error, and it tells me post CSS cannot read properties of undefined. So the error is that pretty much our sanity folder needs its own tailwind.config.js. So what I will do is pretty much copy our tailwind.config.js file and then paste it inside of the sanity folder right here. So it's pretty much just the same. And if I now save that and let me restart our dev server, so npm run dev, I will again close the terminal and go back and let me reload that. And as you see, everything works now. Now we have fixed this error, so we can continue. Now for the login provider, you should just choose with which you have created your account. Since I have done that with GitHub, I will choose GitHub. And now this will pretty much redirect us to the dashboard or to the studio. And now the first thing you see is that no document types have been found. And why is that? That's because if you go back to our Explorer and inside of the schemas folder and inside of the index.ts, you see we pretty much export an empty array. But we don't want that. We want to export our schema that we have just created. So inside of this array, just type post, and this will import post from our schemas folder. So let's do that. Let me save that and let's go back. And now you will pretty much see our schema right here, which is post. Now inside of here, I can create a new pretty much post. So let me do that. And let's see if everything works. And yes, that looks good to me. Now one thing I already see that I don't like is that I have to pretty much create my own slug. I don't want that. I want to pretty much generate the slug from the title. And to do that, let's again go into the post schema right here. And then for our slug, let me create an options field. And right here, we'll give it in source, which will be title. And if I now go back and if I create a little title, so hello from Next.js, I can now click on generate, and this will generate a slug based on the title. So that looks good. And now I will create pretty much two demo blog posts. And if you want to use the same, just go to my GitHub README and copy them from there. So I have now created two blog posts. So one exploring Remix 1, and right here you see in content pretty much. And we have at the bottom a small little image. And the same is also true for Next.js. I've pretty much created a bit of content and an image right here on the bottom. So both of them are now published, and now we are pretty much finished with sanity, and we can pretty much continue inside of our front end. So let's do that right now. So the first thing we will actually have to do is pretty much create our sanity client, with which we can then pretty much fetch the data from sanity. So to do that, go inside of your app folder, and inside of here we will create a new folder called lib. And inside of this lib folder, I will create a new file called sanity.ts. Now inside of our sanity.ts, I first of all have to install a package. So let me go back to our terminal. Let me open a new terminal page right here. And let's do an npm I next-sanity. Let me click enter, and this will now pretty much install the sanity client, which is made for Next.js. So I will come back once that's finished. So now that's done. So let's start configuring our client. So what I will first of all do is pretty much create a few constants. So let's do a const project ID, and this will be equal to an empty string. We'll have a const data set, and right here I already know the data set, since we already pretty much created that when we have installed or created our Sanity project. And if you can remember, the command was pretty much dash dataset production. So that's why I already know that our dataset is production. And now the last thing we'll need is a const API version. And the API version will just be 2023-01-01. So that looks good. And what I will have to do now is an export const client. And this will be equal to create client. And inside of here, let me now pass our project ID, our data set, and API version, not API host. And also, let's use an use CDN, which will be true. And all this does is pretty much enables us to use the CDN from Sanity, so we don't have to pretty much fetch the data every time from the Sanity database, but we can use the CDN from Sanity. So that looks good, but now I need the project ID, so let me go to the sanity.io website. So I have now logged into pretty much Sanity and click the project, and right here already you see the project ID. So all I have to do is actually just copy that, and let me go back and let me just paste it inside of here. So that's actually all we have to do. Our Sanity client is now pretty much working, and we can now fetch the data. So what I will now do is actually just close all the tabs right here on top. And now let me open the page.tsx, which is pretty much our index page. And now I think the first thing we will actually do right here is get our data. So let me again open our Sanity Studio. Now, if you're new to Sanity, you probably didn't know that Sanity uses its own custom query language called Grok. And they have a pretty cool tab, which is called Vision right here. And inside of here, you can pretty much test out your query. And now, if you didn't know how a query looks like inside of Sanity or with the language Grok, all you have to pretty much do is first of all use an asterisk and an empty array. If I would now fetch that, so let me click fetch, you will pretty much see we get all of our items right here, so all data. But what I want to do is pretty much get our data, which is inside of our post schema. So what you will then do is inside of this array, an underscore type, which will be equal to post. And this should only be 2 equal signs and not 3. And what I can do now is click on fetch again, and you will see we only get 2 items, and that's because we only have created 2 blog posts. So that looks good, and now we can continue again. So since we have now tested our query and we see that it works, what I will just do is now copy our query, and now let me go to our code right here, and inside of here we can now create a new async function. So I will just do async function, and the name of our function will be just get data. And now let me open that function. Now inside of here, all I have to do is a const query, and this will be equal to our query, which I will use with upticks. So just like that, and that looks good. But now our query is pretty much static, so we also have to fetch that. So what I will just do is a const data, which will be equal to await client, which we import from our lib folder, dot fetch, and inside of here you just pass the query. So that looks good, and now I have to return that, so I will do a return data. So now I will also have to get it inside of our front end, so what I will just do is now inside of our export default function, let me do a const data, which will be equal to await get data. Now you'll see we get an error, and if I hover over await, it pretty much tells us that our function, so our export default function, has to be pretty much async. So let me do that. So let's do an export default async function. And now our error is gone, and that looks good. Now one thing I already see is if I hover over data, you see that the type of data is any. And I don't really like that. What I want to have is pretty much types. So what I will do is actually create a new interface. So let's go into the lib folder, and inside of here let me create a new file called interface.ts. And now inside of here I will pretty much create an interface where we get all the types. So let's do an export interface, and this will have the name of post, and let me open that. Now the first field we have is the title, and this will be of type string. We will have an overview, which will also be string. We'll have the content field, which will be just any, since I don't really know what types we will have. And then we'll have an underscore ID, which will be also string. We'll have a slug, and the slug will have a current field, which will be string. And then we'll also have an underscore created at, and this will just be in string. So that looks now good. So let me go back to our page.tsx. And what I will have to do now inside of here is just do an as post. So let me do that. The post I import from our lib, and now that looks good. Now, if I hover over data, you will see that the data is of type post, but that's not really correct since the post or the data that we will get back actually will be an array and not an object. So right here, let's do in post, which will be an array. And if I now hover over data, you will see that the data will be of post array. So that looks good. And now we can actually create the user interface, so the UI. So let's do that. Let's do a return. And inside of here, we'll have a div. Let me style that div. So let's give it a class name, which will be divide y. We'll have a divide, which will be gray 200. We'll have a dark, which will be divide, which of gray 700. Now inside of this div, I will create another div and let me style that. So let's give it a class name, which will be space of y2. We'll have a padding top of 6 and we'll have a padding bottom of 8. Then let's also give it a medium of space y of 5. So that looks good. And now inside of here, I will create an h1 tag and let me do an all posts. And let's also style that. So let's give it a class name of text, which will be 3XL, font, which will be extra bold. Then we'll also have a leading, which will be 9. I will have tracking, which will be tight. And then we'll also have a text, which will be gray 900, dark, which will be text gray 100, and SM, which will be text 4XL, SM, which will be leading of 10, medium, which will be text 6XL, and MD, which will be leading of 14. So now that looks good, so I can save that. And now let me check if my dev server is running, and it isn't. So let me do an npm run dev, and let me go back to our local host. So now inside of our local host, you already see that everything looks way better. So I think we can continue now. So what I will do is go under the h1 and under the div, and let's create a new UL tag. And now inside of this UL, I will pretty much map over our posts. So let's do that. So let me just do an data.map. We'll have a post, and let me just return that. Now inside of here, I want to create an li tag. And the first thing I will have to do is give it a key, since I don't want any React errors. And the key will just be post._id. And then we'll also have a class name, which will just be py of 4. Now inside of here, I will create an article tag, and I will also style that. So let me give it a class name, which will be space of y2. We will have an XL, which will be grid. We'll have an XL, which will be grid calls 4. We will have XL, which will be items of baseline. And we will have an XL, which will be space y of 0. So that looks good. And now inside of this article tag, let me create a new div tag. And inside of here, let me create a new p tag. And let me style that. So let's give it a class name of text, which will be base. We'll have a font, which will be medium, and leading, which will be of 6. And we will have a text, which will be of teal 400. Or actually, let's change it to 500. And now this p tag will pretty much store our created at date. And if you want to test it out, let's do that. So let's do in post.created at, and let me save that. If I now go back, you pretty much see our dates right here, or at first you actually see both our blog posts and the dates. But I don't really like the formatting of the date, so let me change that. So let me delete this post created at, and let me do a new date. Let me pass the post _created at. This will be a 2 ISO string, and then I want to split it. So I'm dot split, and I want to split the t. And if I now save that and go back, you will see that this will look way better, but still that does not look perfect. And to change that, all you have to do is at the end pretty much use the first item in the array. So let's do that. So array 0. And if I now save that and go back, you will now see that the date is pretty much looking great and it's formatted perfectly. So now we can continue. So what I will do is go under the p tag and under the div tag. And now let me just create a link component, or pretty much use the link component from Next. So let me import that from Next/link and let me pretty much open that. Now you will see TypeScript already complains, and that's because I have to give it a href prop. And let me just use again a dynamic value. So let's use upticks. This will then be /post/dynamic value, which will be post.slug.current. Now that looks good. Now let me give it a few more fields. So let me also use the prefetch prop, and let's also do a class name, which will just be space of y3, and we will have an XL, which will be called span of 2. Now, or not 2, but 3 actually. Now that looks good. And now inside of this link component, I want to create a new div tag, and inside of this div tag, I want to create an h3 tag. And now let me style that. So I will give it a class name, which will just be text of 2XL. We'll have a font, which will be bold. Leading will be 8. Tracking, which will be tight. We will have a text, which will be gray 900. And we'll have a dark, which will be text gray 100. Now that looks good. And inside of this h3 tag, I want to pretty much show my post.title. So that looks good. And now the last thing I want to do is pretty much show the overview. So let me go under this h3 tag and under the div tag and create a new p tag. Let me style that. So let's give it a class name, which will be pros. We'll have a max width of none and text, which will be gray 500. And we'll have a dark, which will be text gray 400. Now this pros class name pretty much comes from the plugin we have installed beforehand. And if you wouldn't use the plugin, so this typography plugin, you couldn't use this class name. So just that you know that if you aren't familiar with this plugin. And now inside of here, I want to render over overview. So I will do in post.overview. So let me save that and let's go back. And now you will see that that looks pretty much perfect and we are now pretty much done. So before I actually continue, one thing you maybe could change is the line clamp. So right now our overview is pretty much 3 lines long, but if you want to be consistent, you could do a line clamp. So let's do a line clamp of 2. And now if I save that and go back, you will see now we have 2 lines. And now this will be always consistent. So if we create a new blog post, which will be maybe 5 lines long, we will still only render 2 lines. So that looks good. And what I want to do now is pretty much create the details page for our blog. So let's do that right now. To do that, go inside of your app folder and create a new folder called post. And now inside of this post, you will create a new or not a new, but another folder. And this will be an array. And inside of the array, we'll have a name, which will be slug. And all this does is pretty much create a dynamic route, which will pretty much get in slug. Since if you can remember, we have created this link right here, which pretty much links to the /post/slug. And that's pretty much what we create right here. We create this post route and then this dynamic slug route. And now inside of the slug folder, let's create a new file called page.tsx. And now that's pretty much finished. So the first thing I think I will do actually is fetch our data. So let's again do a function called async function get data. And right here, let me open that function. And right here, I want to pretty much fetch our data, which matches the slug of our page. So what you want to do is pretty much do a const query. So let's do that. And this will be equal again to the upticks. And inside of here, we'll use the asterisk with the array. So that's how we always start with grok. And then we'll have our underscore type, which will be again equal to our post. So let me do that. And now if I would just leave it like that, we would again get all of our posts. So all of our blog posts. But I don't want that. I only want to get one specific. So let's use a multiple filter. Let's use a double and right here I want the slug.current to pretty much be equal to the slug that I get from the params. So right here let's use a dynamic value, which will just be slug. And I don't get the slug right here, so let's get them right here, and slug will be of type string. So that looks good. And now what I will do is pretty much fetch that data. So let's do a const data, which will be equal to await client. I import client from our lib folder dot fetch, and let's pass our query. Now the last thing I have to do is return that. So let's do return data. So that looks good. And now let's create our export default function. So let me do an export default function. Let's name it ID page, or not ID, let's name it slug page actually. And then let me just open that. So that looks good. And now inside of here, I want to again get our data from the front end. So what I will do is again a const data, which will be equal to await get data. And if I now save that, you will see we get 2 errors. Let me first of all hover over await, and it will again tell us that we have to use an async function. So let me change that to an export default async function. So that error has now gone away. But if I now hover over get data, you still see we get an error. That's because we haven't passed an argument for slug. And that's correct, since we want to get this argument pretty much through our params. So let me write here the structure our params. And now TypeScript will give us an error since it does not know what type params is. So let's give it in type. So params will pretty much be in slug, which will be in string, just like that. So that looks good. And now inside of this get data, all I have to do is pretty much pass our params.slug. So that looks good. And now we are actually, I think, done with that. Or actually, we are not done. And that's because I already see 2 things I don't like. If I now fetch that query or our content as it is, we will get an array back. But I only want to get an object back since we only fetch one pretty much post. So right here at the end, you use again an empty array with a 0, since I want to pretty much get the first item inside of the array. And that's also the recommended pretty much way by Sanity. So that looks good. And now the next thing I don't like is if I hover over data, you again see our data's any, and I don't want that. So let me again do an as post, which I import from our interface. And if I now hover over data, you will see that data is of type post. So that looks good. And now we can pretty much create our UI. So let's do that. Let's create a new return. And inside of here, let's use a div. And now let me give it a class name. So we have a class name of divide, which will be y, divide, which will be gray, of 200. And we'll have a dark, which will be divide of gray 700. So that looks good. And now inside of this div, let me use a header. And let me style that header. So let's give it a class name of padding top 6 and XL of padding bottom 6. So that looks good. And now inside of here, let me create a new div and let me style that. So let's give it a class name of space, which will be y of 1, and text, which will be center. And inside of this div, I will create a new div and let me style that div. So let's give it a class name of space, which will be y of 10. Now inside of here, I will again create a new div and a new p tag inside of this div. And inside of here, I want to pretty much render our data again. So let me first of all style our p tag. So let's give it a class name, which will be text of base. We'll have a font, which will be medium, and we'll have a leading of 6, and a text, which will be of teal 500. And now for the p tag, so for our created at date, pretty much, let me go back to our index page and let me just copy our date right here, our function. And let me paste that inside of here. And for our post, let me change it to data. And if I now save that and go back and let me click on a post, so let me click on the first post right here, you will see we get redirected and we see our date right here. So that works perfectly, and I think we can now continue actually. So what I will do is go under the p tag and under the 2 following divs and let me create a new div element. And inside of this div, let's create an h1 tag. and let me style that. So let's give it a class name, which will have a text of 3XL. We'll have a font, which will be extra bold. We'll have a leading, which will be of 9. We will have a tracking, which will be of tight. Then we'll also have a text, which will be of gray 900, and in dark, which will be of text gray 100. And we'll have an SM, which will be text 4XL, SM, which will be leading of 10, MD, which will be text 5XL, and MD, which will be leading of 14. And now inside of here, I want to render our title. So let's do just data.title. And if I now save that and go back and let me again click on the first post, you will right here now see, if I reload that, you will see that we have our date and you see we have our title right here. So that works perfectly. And now I want to pretty much render our rich text. So let me go under this header tag right here and let me create a new div element. Inside of here, let's create a class name, which will be of divide y. We'll have a divide, which will be gray 200, and we will have a padding bottom of 8, dark, which will be divide of gray 700, and an XL of divide y, which will be 0. Now under that or inside of this div, let's create another div and let's style that. So let's give it a class name of divide again y. Divide will be gray 200. We'll have a dark, which will be divide gray 700. We'll have an XL, which will be call span of 3. And I want to create an XL, which will be row span of 2. And an XL, which will be padding bottom of 0. And then inside of this div, let's create another div and let me style that. So let's give it a class name of pros. We'll have a max width of none. Let's have a padding bottom of 8 and a padding top of 10 and in dark, which will be pros invert, and then also in pros, which will be large. Now that looks good. And now inside of this div element, I want to pretty much render our rich text from sanity. But before I do that, let me first check if everything looks good on our website. So right here we have our page, we have pretty much our date, we have our title and this little border. Now if I make it mobile, let's check if everything else looks good. So let's do it like that. And yeah, that looks good, but I don't want to see this border on mobile. So let's go back and right here on the first div, let me change everything to only be seen on XL devices. So let's do an XL of divide y, XL of divide gray 200, and an XL of dark divide gray 700. If I now save that and I go and again go back to mobile, you will now see that we don't have this border and this looks way better in my opinion. And if I go back to our desktop page, the border is again seen and that looks good. So we can now continue and actually show our rich text. And to do that, we will actually need a package. So open your terminal and inside of here, you will have to do an npm I portable text react. And if you don't want to type out everything, as always, go to my GitHub, copy the command and paste it inside of here. But what I will do now is just click enter. And this is pretty much a package to render the rich text for pretty much React. So yeah, that's the basic overview. You don't need to know any more. So let's give it a second and it's already finished. So I can close the terminal. And now inside of this div element, I will just do a portable text, which I import from add portable text /react. Let's do a self-closing tag. And now I will have to pretty much give it 2 params. So first of all, the value, and value will just be data.content, and we'll have a components field. And for now, I will just leave it empty, but we of course will change that. So now if I save that actually and go back to our code and let me reload everything, you'll see that won't work since I have to restart our dev server. So let me do that. And now you'll see that our page pretty much works. So the basics are done. We pretty much render our HTML right here, and that looks perfect in my opinion. But I already see one thing I don't like, and this is because I don't see the image. Because if you can remember, I pretty much created an image inside of the rich text, but right now I don't see that. So why is that? So to make it work, I will actually have to use this components property. So let's do that. Let me go on top and let's create a new constant. So let's create right here on top a new constant, which will just be called, let's say, portable text component, something like that. It's not important how you name it, it should only just exist. So that looks good. And this will now open a new object. And inside of here, we'll have the types. And now inside of this types, I will get an image, and the image I will pretty much want it to be shown inside of the image component from Next.js. So what I will do is right here, I will get the image and I will pretty much destructure the value from the image. And this will just be in type of any. So let's do any. And then let me just return it as an arrow function. And now inside of here, let me use the image component from Next.js. So let me import that. And right here, it will complain now, since I have to give it in source. And to make it actually work, we again have to install something from Sanity. I know that's a lot of installing, but what you have to do is again open your terminal and do an npm install add sanity image URL. And this package is pretty much used to create the images, since if you check out what we get back when we fetch the content from Sanity, you won't see any image URL. You only get an ID and stuff like that. But I want to get the image URL, so that's why I have to use this package. And now to make it work, what you will have to do is actually open the Explorer, go inside of the lib folder, and let's create a new file called sanity image url.ts. And now inside of this file, you will have to do a const builder, and this will be equal to image url builder. And inside of here, let me pass the client. So the client is again imported from our lib folder. And now already one thing I see is that our image URL builder is not imported correctly. So first of all, let me delete this brackets. And I only want to import it from sanity image URL. So let me delete the rest from here. So now that looks good. And what I will have to do now is create a function. So let's do an export function. And this will be an URL for, and inside of here I will get in source, and let's do any. And now let me open that and let's return builder, and right here we'll have an .image and we'll pass our source. So that looks good. And now if I go back to our page right here, so what all I have to do now actually is right here create our source, and I will have to use the URL for function that I've just created. So let me import that from our lib. And then let me pass our value, and then we'll have to do an .url. So right here we pretty much generate the URL for the image. Now right here TypeScript still complains a bit, and that's because I have to give it an alt. So let's give it an alt and let's just say image. So that looks good. And now I also want to add a class name. So this will be of rounded LG. Let's do a width of 800 and let's do a height of also 800. And then I think that's actually good enough. And if I now save that and go back, I will again have to start my dev server. So let me do that, npm dev. You will still see we see nothing. And that's actually just a mistake by myself. So right here we have created our constant. So let me copy that. And now inside of our components right here, property, let me just paste that inside of here. So now if I save that and go back, you will now see we get an error by Next.js, and that's because we pretty much have to configure our host name inside of the next.config.js. So let me just open our next.config.js, and now inside of this next config, let's do an images, and right here I will have to give it in domains, and this will just be cdn.sanity.io. So what you have to do now is to restart our dev server. So let me do again an npm dev. And now let's go back to localhost 3000. So I'm now on localhost 3000 again. And as you see, we still have our text. So that works great. But if I now scroll down, you will also see that we get the image. So that looks great. And that works perfectly just as I wanted. Also, let me just check out if the other blog article works. So let me click on my title, and as you see, the redirect works perfectly. And now let me click on Exploring Remix. You will also see that almost looks instant, and we have our URLs right here pretty much. We have our text, and if I scroll down, we have our image. So I think that actually looks great. And let me also check if white mode works. And yes, that looks all great. Let me again click on our home page. And yeah, I think we are done actually. Everything works. Dark mode works. The whole storage of our preference works. Our theming works. Our fetching works. Everything works. We don't have any errors. So I think the time has come to now pretty much deploy our application to Vercel. So let's do that right now. So to do that, I'm right now at GitHub and I clicked new repository, and now let's give it a name. So let me think of a good name. Let's just say blog Next.js 13, and I will make it public. And now let me click create repository. Now this right here will now give us a few pretty much instructions to create a new repository. So let me go back to VS Code. Let me open the terminal. Let me clear everything. And let's start off with git init, which will pretty much initialize a new empty git repository. And then the next step is to do in git add everything, which you do within dot. So that looks good. And now if I go back to our repository, you will see that the next step is to add pretty much our first commit. So let me copy that, let me paste that, and let's change the message to, let's say, finished website. Now let me click enter. This will now commit our files. And now let me create a new branch. So let me copy that and paste that right here. Now the next step is to add a new remote origin. So I will paste that right here. And now the last step is to push our code. So I will copy that and paste that right here now. Now you will see our code will be pushed to our repository. And if I now reload our Git repository, you will right here see our code. You will see my sanity folder, you will see my app folder, so everything works and that looks great. Now one thing you already see is that my times are a bit different, so a few things have been created pretty much a minute ago and a few things already have been created a few hours beforehand, but for you everything should be pretty much everything from a minute ago. So now we can continue to Vercel and now let's deploy it. So I'm now at vercel.com/new, and now let me import my new repository right here, which I've created. And right here, everything is already done for us. They already have created our framework preset, and we don't have to add any environment variables. So all I have to do right now is just click on deploy, and this will now take a bit. So I will come back once that's finished. So you don't see what we should see right now. We don't have a finished application, but we have a nice error. Yeah, that's what we want to see, right? So let's check out what the error is. And it tells me that it cannot find the module sanity vision. And that's correct. It shouldn't actually need to find that since I don't want to deploy sanity. So what I will actually do right here inside of our root directory, I will create a new file called .vercelignore. And inside of here, all I think I have to do actually is just add sanity. So just like that. And now I think that's done. So let's start off again with an git add everything. Let's do an git commit -m. Everything should work now. And let me click enter. And let's do an git push. So now that looks good. Now let me go back to Vercel, and you will now see that our application right here redeploys. So let me see if everything works. And if the error again comes up, I will come back to you. So great news, everyone. Our project has been deployed successfully. And if I now click on it and let me zoom in a bit, you will see that looks just perfect, just as I want it to look. So I think we are done. Let me check out if everything works. Let me click on white mode, and if I now reload our page, that still says the same, so that is good. If I now click on a post, so let me click on Next.js, you will see everything loads perfectly, and we have our text and we have our image. And if I go back to our index page and click on Remix 1, you will see this also almost loads instantly, and we have our text and the image. So we are now done, it's deployed, everything works. And I hope you pretty much learned something new, you enjoyed the tutorial, and we will see us on the next video. So, bye.